This is Open Source Tonight for February 5th, 2020, and I'm your host, Vincent Maggard, and I'm joined by my co-host, Carmen Shields, today.
Hello, how are you doing today, Vincent?
I'm doing quite well, and I'm going to try and actually talk less in this episode, because I'm real bad for that, so hopefully you'll hear Carmen a little bit.
You might hear me say something.
We hope so. That's the idea. So, Carmen, as always, we start with open source news for the week. I'm sure you already knew that, though. So, any stories you want to talk about, or should I just jump into a few of mine?
I'll let you jump into it. Nothing comes to mind right now.
All right. Well, we're going to start with the Lightworks non-open source video editor, but it runs on Linux, so it's close enough. And so let's talk about that. So the Lightworks video editor for Linux, I've messed around with it and tested it out. It's okay. I don't know. One of these days I might end up licensing it. You never know. But they've recently released a brand new beta, which adds some interesting new features. So we're going to talk about them here. And today's episode is all about video production. So it just made sense that we talk about this editor, which is related to video production on Linux, right? So we're going to start there. So give me just a second. I'm pulling up my the article here that I wanted to reference. Okay, so some of the included new features is support for 1904 and 1910 Ubuntu. They've added an HD overlay for the vector scopes, the tile view in the bin directory. Now you can show text outside of the tile, and so a bunch of other stuff. Supporting transcoding UHD media, blah 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 blah. Better keyboard shortcuts, blah 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 blah. If you want to try out Lightworks 20's new beta, you can try it out for 1804 and above. And to do so, visit Lightworks' website. I believe that's, what is it? It's lwks.com. So any comments about this, Carmen? Any thoughts on the Lightworks video editor?
Nothing really comes to mind. I think I used it briefly before, but it's been too long for me to really have an informed opinion. So I'm just going to leave it to what it is.
I see. Well, I didn't even realize you'd use the Lightworks editor, so that's interesting.
Fairly sure I have. I might have... No, I think I have used it before because I remember installing it on Windows, and then I installed it on Linux because it'd probably be faster on Linux, but I don't know for sure.
I mean, I don't think I've ever used it on Windows, but I mean, it works pretty good on Linux. It's okay. If my machine was more powerful, it would probably be even better. But it's not. But I don't know.
Actually, let me see. I'm cheating here, folks. I have a Mac here as well. Yes, I have it installed on my Mac, so I've definitely tried it before. And I'm pretty sure I've tried it on Windows, Mac, and Linux. I might have just installed it on one of those and not tried it. I can't remember which one. I really don't have an opinion on it.
Do you know what version you installed?
I feel like if I launch it, it'll crash the machine. I have too many things open. It says version 1.0, but that's in the info screen. I'm not sure how accurate that is.
Yeah, that's pretty old. I don't even think they ever had a version 1.0 for Mac. So
I just don't think they have that info in there correctly.
Probably. But yeah, so anyway, I think it's an interesting editor. If I ever upgrade my video production workstation, I might end up trying licensing the pro version or whatever it's called, because they have a free version and I've used that. And it's actually okay, but it's a little sluggish on my machine. But it's got some really cool features that I'd like to be able to use, like multicam editing of sequences, where you can like press keys to like switch between multiple camera angles. Once you sync between either time code or audio, you can do like 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever, and it will switch to that camera and automatically make the cuts for you, and then you can go back and add transitions. So that would be really cool, because I wanted to do some more multicam stuff, so that would need to be edited. But there's not too much news this week. Another thing that's this week is Linux Mint has added support for fractional scaling support to the Cinnamon desktop. This is probably welcome news to you, because I know you're the guy over here that likes those high resolution monitors like on the MacBooks, and that scaling is pretty important for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell me, Carmen, are you going to give this a try, you think? Maybe run this on your MacBook. It's a dual boot or anything, or try it in a VM?
I'd have to look at the full list of features and see if performance has improved, but I probably will give it a try. I have a preferred editor right now. I don't really like to interrupt my workflow, But
I was
it's
actually
nice to
talking
try
about
something new,
Linux
too.
Mint Cinnamon Desktop now, but okay.
Oh God.
Yeah,
Well, I guess that applies too. Let's edit that out. Okay, let's restart that question. Folks, we're doing it live, and I really need to be less distracted. Okay, not distracted anymore.
So tell me, Carmen, do you think that you would like to try out Linux Mint on your Mac and your MacBook with the high-res monitor and just see
Oh
if
no,
the scaling's good?
I wouldn't try that on my Mac. My Mac is no. I would try that on my Linux machine, but it doesn't really help with the scaling. I don't know.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
In front of me, what I need in front of me if I'm going to try this is a dedicated computer with a high resolution display. I really don't like to install. I don't really like to mess with my Mac because it's kind of mission critical. So actually, the workflow comment applies. It would mess with my workflow if I tried to put it on my Mac. But as far as like trying it in general, I wouldn't be closed to the idea if I had the hardware to do it.
I see. Well, I mean, you don't have to have a 4K monitor or something like that to do it. It's just, it doesn't make any sense, does it? Without that.
Right.
Or at least not just at test. I mean, you got Ubuntu on your ThinkPad right now, right?
ThinkPad. I haven't used my ThinkPad in a long time. I know I sold a couple.
Or not your ThinkPad,
ThinkPads.
sorry, your workstation, I mean.
Oh, you're good. My workstation, I have Ubuntu 1804.
I got you. That's what I have on my workstation right now.
1804. I say that with uncertainty because I don't really think about the version. I'm fairly sure I have the 1804. Yes.
Okay. Well, that pretty much wraps up our news for this week. So, well, let me see if there's anything else on that Linux Mint thing we should bring up other than the fractional scaling. It looks like, that looks like that's the only thing this article's about. So, okay. So our main topic for today's episode is video production on Linux, and doesn't necessarily have to be open source software. So proprietary options are fair game, to be discussed, of course, like Dissolve or Lightworks. And so, would you ever consider, first of all, start with this, would you ever consider editing video on Linux? Or is that something you're just like, that's never happening, I'm not going to use a Linux machine for that?
I'd consider it. I know people in the Linux community aren't going to like me for saying this, but I really wish they would bring Adobe Premiere to Linux, because it's like no matter what you use, and I don't care if it's open source, proprietary, there just hasn't been a piece of software for me that's came close to Adobe Premiere just in general. But that being said, I think that I might not be giving it enough room there. Like, I really am just kind of steadfast in my ways, and I think I could aim to be more open-minded to it. So really, I think it comes down to what has the best workflow for the most people, and that is really a personal question. That being said, I think editors in Linux are getting better from what I've seen and heard. I need to give it more of a shot again. The last time I tried editing video on Linux was a while back, and admittedly...
What editor did you try?
I'm pretty sure... I know I tried Lightworks, and I remember DaVinci Resolve. It's honestly been so long, I really can't give a super informed opinion. What I will say is that what I do remember is that it still didn't feel quite the same as my workflow I was used to, but I think that's also because I wasn't used to the software. I'd been using it for the first time. I can't remember if the graphics acceleration was working properly. Now, speaking of which, I don't know this off the top of my head, but do you know which Linux editors have graphics acceleration, which ones don't at this point?
I do, because I'm really picky about that. I for any video editor software, I don't care if it's proprietary or open source, one of the first checkboxes you have to check for me to even put you on my machine to use, and I'm sorry if you think this doesn't matter, is GPU acceleration for preview. Like, I don't even care. The rendering can be CPU, but for previewing, I want GPU accelerated video playback, because otherwise I'm going to have to deal with a lot of dropped frames and stuttering. But as far as the actual editors that use it, Kaline Live had limited support for it. Then they pulled out it. Then I think they put something back recently, from what I remember. So it's kind of limited there. Then you've got stuff like Olive, which doesn't do does CPU rendering for the output, but does really good GPU rendering of the preview. So if you're like wanting that silky smooth preview and you want to go open source, Olive to me is the right choice for you at this point, because that will give you that. Now, as far as proprietary goes, Lightworks does GPU acceleration, and I find on Linux it works really good. So again, if you're going to go the proprietary route, that's always an option too. DaVinci Resolve, it requires more of a beefy system than I have, but I've heard good things about it if you run it on CentOS, which is or Red Hat, which is their approved Linux distributions, that you can get pretty good support out of it. That being said, I've seen YouTubers like Premier Prep actually using it on Ubuntu with good frame rates. So I think if you have a powerful enough system, DaVinci Resolve can be pretty good for you too.
Let's see. I have Lightworks installed on my Linux workstation, but I do not have DaVinci Resolve, which I feel like I tried that, but maybe I didn't. I can feel like it could have went either way. Yeah, but I know I've definitely tried Lightworks. Definitely tried it. I feel like I've tried DaVinci Resolve. I'm going to look it up real quick. Live on the show. We're doing the research.
Yep. I mean, I personally like Lightworks better. If it came down to DaVinci Resolve versus Lightworks for me, it's Lightworks, because, and I don't even like the idea of having to pay for a monthly fee, but it's not too bad for Lightworks. And the big thing for me is I want an editor that works. And to me, Lightworks is, it's stable. It works. Honestly, well, it's not perfectly stable, but it's okay. What I'd really like to see, and I'll echo your thoughts here a few minutes ago in the podcast, I like Premiere Pro. I would love to see Adobe bring it to Linux. I understand some people don't agree with this, and that's fine. The whole point of Linux is freedom. You don't have to install it. You don't have to pay for a Creative Cloud subscription if you don't want to. I'm not even sure I would actually use it if Adobe brought it to Linux, because that price point, like, that's the big thing I have an issue with Adobe software, other than the fact it's not on Linux, is that monthly fee. I don't like it. Well, I don't want to have to pay a monthly fee for software.
I could be remembering this wrong, but what is the actual business model of Lightworks? Like,
it's the same thing as Creative Cloud, so it's monthly subscription.
And it's not technically open source. They've said before we're going to make it open source in the past, but no one's really seen, unless I'm wrong, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
They never open sourced it.
So I don't really see what the advantage is. Which I'm not saying anything against the Lightworks team or their product. I'm just saying,
the advantage is it will run on Linux, and if you want to use Linux,
right? Then, but what I think the point I'm trying to get to is that the detractors from Premiere coming to Linux should not be on board with Lightworks of the same logic either. Really, then the only reason you don't like Premiere is because you don't like Adobe, which I'm not even going to get into that debate, but it seems like if they're trying to go off the merits of it not being open source, there's already other very popular non-open source apps like Lightworks, even though it's supposed to be more geared towards the Linux open source community. At least that's the impression I've gotten.
Lightworks, from what I understand, Lightworks is geared towards the pro editor. So if you're editing TV shows, you're editing stuff you're making your living off of, it seems to be that's the market they're going after, because they're designing it. It's kind of like Avid, it seems like to me. Now, to be fair, I've never edited on Avid. I've just seen Avid before, like videos of people using it and stuff. But it seems kind of like it was designed to be similar to Avid, which makes sense because they say that it's for the pro editor for television and movies. And what is the number one editor in both fields still? It's Avid, even though Premiere's taken over a little bit now. But
right. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but apparently The Wolf of Wall Street was edited in Lightworks. I did not know that.
Yep.
That's interesting.
It's edited several Emmy-winning films or something like that. Some award. So it's pretty cool.
How long has it been around for?
Lightworks has been around for a long time. I forget exactly how long. Now I got to look it up and see here real quick. I think it's been around.
Doing the research?
Yeah, I'm doing the research. I think it's been around for at least 10 years. It's been around for a while, and let me see here. The company that makes it, for those wondering, is this company called EditShare.
Oh, okay. It's been around apparently it's been in development since 1989.
Yep.
1989, at least according to Wikipedia.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I was reading too, is Wikipedia, and then you can see the history there and everything. We'll put a link to this in the show notes, but it's edited some different pictures and stuff that you might have heard of. So the King's Speech, that's one that they like to always brag about that I edited, among many others.
The earliest film, I may interrupt you there. The earliest film I see on the list here is Pulp Fiction.
Yep.
Pulp Fiction was edited in Lightworks. Okay, it's got some credit.
Yep. I mean,
okay, but I can see where people are coming from, but then it's more of competition. So if we're saying like, okay, a Premiere shouldn't come to Linux, why?
It should come to Linux.
Like, I get it. I'm not trying to dog anyone, but I'm just saying, like, logically, like, there's already non-open source editors in Linux, and I know this is an open source podcast, and I would honestly like to see the open source community continue to improve on it. That being said, I can't really sit here and talk unless I'm either willing to donate to a project or I'm going to get on the computer and start coding and building this editor myself. So yeah. I'm not going to sit here on my high horse all day, but I guess I'm saying, like, it'd be nice to see a feasible open source alternative, but it seems like right now the proprietary software is just that wee bit better to where it's going to be a little while before the open source software will be able to catch up and fully eclipse it, or at least get to the point where the proprietary software pretty much is right now.
I mean, honestly, you know, I'm a believer in open source software. I like open source software, but when it comes to video, the open source software, depending on who you compare to, it's not even really a comparison. Like, to me, Olive is one of the best open source editors, and it's not even out of alpha yet. Well, but I mean, it's got a lot of issues. For one thing, let's say you want to do a transition, like a wipe transition, you have to manually keyframe it. Now, if you want that control, you can do it for sure. And their keyframing tools are great, but at the end of the day, if you go into an editor like Premiere or Lightworks, that's just, you know, a drop-in effect, right? So a lot of these editors, and to be fair, like Kdenlive is good on effects. You know, they all are weakened in some areas. Like Kdenlive is really great for effects, but you have to edit either on a machine that's got so much CPU power you can actually render the frames in real time. Which, I mean, to be fair, if you got the budget for that and you can afford it, go do it, and then you can render the frames in real time. Or you can do proxy clips, and that's supposed to help, but seems to me like every time I've tried Kdenlive, it just always drops frames, whether you do proxy clips or you use on a somewhat high-end machine. Now, to be fair, people like Nerd on the Street, that YouTube channel, for those that watch that channel, he edits his videos in Kdenlive. And I watched him do a video where he was using 1904 to edit a video, Kdenlive 1904, and I didn't see drop frames at all. But to be fair, he had a 16-core system too, so...
Right. I do want to say full disclosure. Let's change that. Okay, I do want to say full disclosure. Full disclosure. I have not, honestly, I'm going to be totally honest, I did not use any open source editing software before this episode. I don't mean ever, but it's been so long. I really don't feel like I have an educated opinion. I think a lot of what I'm saying is bouncing off kind of an somewhat maybe educated opinion. I haven't kept up with it in a while, and a lot of it's just from talking with Vincent and just my experience in the past. So I'm going to put that out there. I don't want to be dishonest. I want to be totally open and honest. Like, maybe that will be a good idea for a future episode. I compare all the different Linux editing software in real time. Like, I go on the screencast and be like, okay, here's Olive, here's Kdenlive, here's blah, 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 and just actually try it out. Because to be honest with you, it's more of a quasi-educated opinion. Yeah. I don't even want to say educated because I need to do more research into the topic.
Well, I'll tell you, I would like to I've actually been thinking about this, where me and you do a video, or maybe just one of us, but, you know, for the Open Source Tonight YouTube channel, where we go over like all the Linux video editors, just like you were talking about, and actually try them out, because I've used a lot of these, but things are always changing. Like Kdenlive, they've done a big refactoring in 1904, and I mean, I've tried to use it, but on Ubuntu, it's not stable. They're using QML, and QML support in Ubuntu 1804 is limited. So what I really need to do is either download Ubuntu 1904 or 1910 and try it on that, or I need to wait till 2004 comes out and then I can use it on that. But I used to edit my videos in Kdenlive. For several years of videos, I edited in Kdenlive. And so I've been using Kdenlive for a long time. The way I see it is, in this day and age, with Linux video editing, if you can handle the dropped frame rate issues in Kdenlive, or option number 2, you have a machine so powerful you don't have to deal with that problem. Or you can get the proxy clips to actually solve the problem for you in a lower end machine, unlike me. Then maybe Kaline Live would be the best choice because it has LUT support. It has color grading support. Pretty much everything you would need to do in a pro edit, it can do. With exclusion of a few things, like multicam support's not there, but you can just line up multiple clips on separate tracks and cut between them pretty easy. I've done that before in Olive, and I've seen people do that in Kaline Live, and it seems to be pretty similar. So really the big issue I have with it is just that it drops frames. The other big thing is, so I've noticed this with Kaline Live, when that you are playing the video, and again, this is on an older version because I can't get the newer version to run very stable. When you play your timeline, right, in the preview view, the first like maybe half a second, the audio stutters and the frames drop. But then even on my machine, it smooths out unless there's an effect, and then it has to like preview render it. And see, that's things you don't have to deal with on an editor like Lightworks or DaVinci Resolve or Olive. When you actually play your timeline back, if you have a GPU in the system, and a pretty decent one. Like I've got one of the NVIDIA ones in mine. It doesn't really drop frames. I mean, every once in a while it will drop a frame, but nothing's perfect. I mean, even Premiere occasionally drops a frame on a machine unless it's like extremely powerful. And even then I would still bet it occasionally happens, right?
Oh yeah. It's all about the power of the machine. Even if you have the best video editor in the world, it's all sorts of software cannot. Even if it's well optimized, so your machine is just not powerful enough for editing video that's very high resolution, then you're going to run into those issues. It's more of a matter of power even. I mean, it isn't. Like, you can optimize, and I think a lot of software out there can stand to be better optimized, not even just video production, just in general. But I will say this, you can only optimize so much. I mean, that's true, but one thing I'll give credit to Adobe for is they will actually optimize their editor very well. They'll use the GPU acceleration, and they're always trying to make it better from what I've heard. And things like that. And then they also, I think they use CPU acceleration as a fallback. So, if you have really fast CPUs, you can do that. Like one of the big issues I have with an editor like Kaline Live is they've clearly designed it around CPU rendering. And from what I can tell, if you have a machine that's got really, really, really fast CPUs, at least really fast by my definition. I mean, they're really not that fast these days, but I mean, I've got like an i5 from a few years ago in this system, and to me, that's a pretty decent processor. And right. I can't even, render like a proxy clip without dropping frames, and that proxy clip is like 240p. So to me, it seems like that the Kaline Live developers should really bring in that GPU acceleration. And according to a blog post, they did do that in one of the 19 series. I think it was 1904. And so, I'd like to try that out because honestly, for me, I like the Olive video editor. I really do. But to me, Kaline Live is just a tiny bit better, like you said, about, different editors being, slightly different. And I mean, one of the big reasons I moved away from it was because I couldn't stand to deal with editing like that. I mean, the way I had to edit in Kaline Live, to make sure my edit was the way I wanted, was I would do my cuts, I would get everything the way I want, and I would do a test render, and I would watch that render to confirm that it was, actually the way I expected it to be. And if it wasn't, I'd have to go back in and change my cuts and do another test render, because the frame rate issue, it would play fine after a few seconds, but for me, it was problematic. One thing I did learn to do, and it did help, was I'm used to other editors where I can just put the what's it called? The little timeline clip thing exactly where I want to start playing. You can't do that in Kaline Live because it's going to drop like the first half a second of audio and video in this weird way. I cannot get used to that.
Yeah.
That being said, I've had issues before with other editors. Like, I'm not going to sit here and lie either. Like, it just depends on what machine you're running it on. Like, if I try to run it on my laptop, I have issues with drop frames, especially if you're editing, like, well, I don't want to say especially because mainly I work with compressed video right now. But honestly, it's not even just compressed video. Like, the thing is, if you want to edit video, you really need a graphics card if you can help it.
Well, you do, really. But the thing is, your software also needs to take advantage of it. And the Kaline Live software, I mean, look, even if that they've added really good support for it now, I understand it's an open source project, but, we've had GPUs for a long time. And other editors have been using that GPU acceleration on their timelines for years upon years now. So to me, the Kaline Live developers just need to, work on that. Like some people want their editor to be like this fancy thing. I'm not. I'll tell you what I want out of an editor. I want to be able to do cuts. I want to be able to do simple transitions like fades and slides. Honestly, that's pretty much it. If I can do a fade up from black, a fade down to black, I can cut and crossfade between tracks and simple stuff like that and be able to keyframe anything else I might need and do like simple titling. That's what I want out of an editor. And if I need to do something more fancy, I'll bring up a program like Blender that can do really great motion graphics. It can do really great compositing, really great chroma key, right? So things like that, to me, I'm going to do what a lot of the pros do, bring it into a separate piece of software that is more focused on that aspect. So to me, I understand why the Kaline Live developers, they're trying to build this one piece of software that can work for everybody. But to me, what they're really doing is just, they say they want to be able to have people that, edit feature films and stuff like that to be able to use it. And I do see people on the mailing list that are saying they're editing stuff, but have you ever heard of a feature-length film or TV show that was edited in Kaline Live? Because I haven't.
I have not, but maybe I'm not looking hard enough for it. I don't know.
I mean, maybe it exists, but as far as I can tell, it seems to be a YouTube thing, and there is YouTube stuff edited on. I mean, a lot of the Linux YouTube channels are editing their content right now on Kaline Live and have been for several years. So that's, as far as that goes, that's not new. So there is a user base of that, and I understand them wanting to make something that the YouTubers can use. And to be fair, I am a YouTuber. That's me. So, I mean, I'm technically that target demographic anyway, if you will, that target market. But the thing is, I am trying to do stuff that's a little bit more fancy than I think some of these other YouTubers. I mean, a lot of these YouTubers that are using it, from what I can gather, are doing like really simple edits, which again is fine. My edits are still simple. But I also want to be able to do documentary work and narrative work where I'm going to have timelines that are like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour long. And the other thing Kaline Live I noticed was the bigger the timeline got, the more sluggish it got. Like you can give it a 2-hour timeline and it will just be like, no problem, bro. We got this. And, that's one of the reasons I like Olive, because yes, it's alpha software and yes, it crashes sometimes, but its auto recovery is pretty good. And which Kaline Live has that too. But to me, Olive is just a better overall when it comes to recovery and stuff like that. The other thing too is saving is really easy. So you can do you just do Control S, you quickly save your project. And then what I do is every time I make a change, I will just do Control S. Right. And, again, that auto recovery works pretty good, but I want it to be my last ditch option. And, if I'm doing a typical video, the editor might crash 2 times or 3 times, and sometimes it doesn't at all. But that's kind of rare. Usually it crashes once or twice. Again, it's an alpha, so I don't expect it to be perfect, but Kaline Live crashes a lot too. And that's another thing I don't like about Kaline Live is it's like you release a version that you say is stable. It should be stable. I mean, I'm a software developer and I understand that, you can't catch every bug and, maybe you think something's stable, but then you push it out to somebody else's machine and it turns out that there's a bug that causes it to crash you didn't know about. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but from what I can tell, Kaline Live has a reputation for crashing like crazy. It's not just my systems. It's not just my workflow that's causing it.
Here's the thing, and I think this is finally a part I feel like I'm really qualified to comment on here, is that video production on YouTube, not all of it, and I think you can be a successful YouTuber and not have like a high budget, high blah, blah, blah production quality. I don't mean like low production quality. Let me rephrase that. I don't mean like low production quality. I just mean that you're spending less time editing or you're not using like lots of transitions or fades. I don't think you need all of that to have a good video necessarily, but YouTube is getting to the point. YouTube is getting to the point where there's more and more emphasis on this type of content where it's somewhat highly produced or well produced, and you do not have to go for that. But if you are going for that, you want an editor. It's going to be stable. It's going to let you do a lot with it, and I think that that's what the people who are developing software, which again, I'm not someone who develops video editing software, so I feel like I can only speak so much here. And you can only expect so much from free software unless you're making it yourself or contributing to the project. But that being said, if you're making software for a video editing demographic, these are all important features and thoughts that people need to think about,
I mean, I agree. And for the record, I'm not trying to bash the Kaline Live developers. Listen, I've used Kaline Live for years in the past. And honestly, if it hadn't been for Kaline Live, I would have had to run a Windows machine for a long time to be able to edit videos on Linux, because for a long time, it was really, in my opinion, the only remotely close to viable option. Sure, it crashes, and sure, it's not perfect, but you can work around it. You can work around its limitations if you know how. And I got good at working around its limitations. For example, it crashes a lot. But again, if you just Control S a lot, you're not going to lose much. And I found it only crashed, maybe once or twice during a video edit for a video. So that wasn't that much to deal with. But I mean, I agree with you. Stable is important. And I also understand at the same time, look, these open source developers, as Joe said in last week's episode, they're underfed and overworked. And I get that. And, I understand that this is, for many of them, it's a hobby. This is something they're doing for the community. And I appreciate that there's editors out there like the Kaline Live developers, like the Openshot developers, that are trying to make software for people like me that honestly, I don't understand how to build video production software. I'm not going to act like I understand it. I don't. If you came to me and said, build me a video editor, I'd be like, you need to go somewhere else, because that's not even remotely close to my territory. I can build web apps. I can build mobile apps. I can build stuff that's not crazy, but
we all have our own specialties.
Exactly.
Right?
And video production software is not my specialty. I honestly wish it was sometimes, because then I could just say, oh, here, Kaline Live, I'll just contribute a patch for you to be able to do good GPU acceleration for your preview or whatever it is, right, that I feel like I need. Because to me, that's the perfect world, is everybody's developers, that uses open source software. I mean, I want non-developers people to use it, but to me, that's the perfect world, because then that community can be really useful, not only just for getting bug reports and stuff, right? But just, hey, I figured out something that this program should have. Here's a patch for it. Enjoy. And then you can put that in the source tree, and then that's the next release, it's going to have it. To me, that's great, because, like, for example, look at studios like Lucasfilms and stuff. They've got on-site developers. And I think if the open source editors could get places like, Lucasfilm, which uses Linux, by the way, to start contributing code to Lightworks, or not Lightworks, but to Kaline Live or to Olive, whatever the editor may be, or any other video production software like Blender. And Blender's actually been pretty good about that. But the Kaline Live developers, it seems to me like that it's much more of a grassroots community thing. And I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, but if you've got studios like Lucasfilm, why not get their help? So
think about this. Like, there's a place for everything, and I think that's where the place is for Kaline Live. Maybe that's what they're going for, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But is it for everyone? No. Does it need to be for everyone? Again, maybe no. It can be that simple sometimes. I don't mean that against what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, maybe that's what they're going for. Just saying, okay, we're not here for Hollywood. We're here for Joe Bob, who's editing his YouTube video. Nothing against Joe Bob. I'm just trying to think of an average name. John Smith, whoever, who's editing their YouTube video.
I mean,
Jane Doe.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is, it seems to me like they're going after the indie market. And like you said, Joe Smith or Jane Doe probably doesn't care if their editor crashes occasionally. He does what they need. Sure, it's not necessarily as professional, but they're making YouTube videos. They're doing it as a hobby. And I mean, there is people that are making their living using Kaline Live too. So, I mean, you can do it. And I mean, I use Olive and I'm editing my videos in it. So, I mean, I guess the open source crowd, we're more comfortable with problems. We're willing to, work around problems more than the pros. But at the same time, I got to say, I want an editor that's stable, And so maybe for me, I'm closer to that pro side. And so for me, maybe I need to go look at something like Lightworks, which, they say themselves, we are aiming this at the pros. We are not aiming this at mom that needs to edit a home video, right? That's not their target market. They're aiming at people like me that wants to edit films, that wants to edit, like a web TV show, stuff like that. That's who that they're aiming it at, right? They're aiming it at people that are serious about video production. I mean, I don't want to say those other people aren't, but they're aiming it at people that either it is their living or they want to treat it like it's their living and make it become their living, right? Like for me, I would love to be able to do like a Netflix show someday. And I can tell you right now, as much as like Olive, I don't think I could edit a Netflix feature, whether that be a feature film or an original, having to do, for one thing, more than likely, we're going to end up having to shoot it on a red, which means probably shooting it with red code. And I don't believe Kaline Live or all of either one supports that. So that's one of the big negatives for me on the open source editors is there is somewhat limited codec support. I mean, Kaline Live and Olive can do ProRes. And so if you're shooting with like an Arri Alexa or something like that, you can totally bring in your footage that way. They support the standard 8.264 and I think 8.265. Well, Lightworks just added support for that actually in the beta. But I mean, I think that for my use case, maybe Lightworks is the better option. I don't know. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I guess I'll just have to wait and see. But at the same time, I think for right now, something like Olive or Kaline Live, like it gets the job done, right? If I ever go out and I start doing that Netflix show, then I'll have the money to go out and get Lightworks, and I can justify that as a business expense, and that's always one way to do it.
Right, and then may I interrupt you there, folks? I think we have a new video idea. Vincent and Carmen go in depth to Linux video editors, and Carmen gets his head into reality and finally starts experimenting with open source video editors again, and not just speaking about it from a philosophical viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I would advise you to check out, as far as there's 3 open source editors I think that are worth looking at, and I'm not saying the others are bad, but to me these are just the ones that I think me and you would be more suited to, and that would be Kaline Live, the Olive video editor. And then the final one, it's kind of a toss-up because I like Blender, but it's really not as good as video editing, but you can do it. So you might try Blender. And then another option, if you want something that's just for like simple edits, Openshot's not too bad, but it's really more like iMovie than it is like Final Cut, so to speak, with the analogy. So it is more limited, but again, it's one of their Openshot really feels to me like it's aimed at the consumer. Right. I feel like it's like for somebody like my mom that just needs to edit a home video together. And for her, it works. And I actually did use it to edit a couple of YouTube videos. And it has some things I wish the other editors would get. Like, for example, it had the ability for like a really quick way to fade a title up or down. Like you could right click on a title and say, do a half a second fade up on this, or slide this in from the left and take half a second to do it. Like that really quick little thing. I know you can manually keyframe it in other editors like Kaline Live and even, Premiere or Lightworks or something like that. But I would love to see being able to do that in other editors, because that was honestly the best feature for me over Openshot. The other thing I'll say about Openshot was it was not that bad about dropping frames. Like it was actually pretty good at that. When you first played, it would drop maybe like 1 frame. But compared to the way Kaline Live was, it was really good. Really, Openshot was worse with the audio. The audio would be like a little strange when like the first maybe 100 milliseconds that it started playing, but it was okay. But to me, Openshot or Olive could easily become a pro level video editor. They've got a lot of things there that, to me signal that they're heading towards a better environment. Right. So we'll see, who knows, but, at the same time, for me, I would like to see a good open source editor. Right. I mean, I think it seems like we both want to see that. Would you agree on that?
I agree with that. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think I'm as much of a purist as a lot of people. So for me, it's not really a sense of urgency, but on a philosophical note and just on a personal note, like obviously it would be nice to have an open source editor. I think open source is the product of what people who are just hobbyists, who are programmers, who are passionate about what they're doing are putting into, while proprietary software is nothing against it, but at the same time, proprietary software is, not open source. You can't see a source code. And there's reasons, I'm sure, for both, open source versus proprietary. That's been the big debate. Yeah. But I think on the same token, it would be exciting to see an open source editor and to see the community advance in that way. So you can really see something, okay, I can work with this, get a project done in this, something that's comparable to the proprietary software out right now. Well,
I'll tell you right now, what I would love to do is have an editor that's like that. And they're taking donations right now, and to try to get it to that point. The Olive developer has indicated that he or she, I'm not really sure the gender of this person, their goal is to get it to be an editor that a pro can use. And I think if they keep on the same track they are now, maybe in a year or two, Olive will be really stable and will be to the point where a pro can actually use it, because it's got LUT support. It's got chroma key. Most of the features that I want in an editor, it's got. If they could just get a stable version, I would be quite happy with it as it is now.
Right.
So and they're working on that. So hopefully they'll get there. I wish that I understood C++ and better than I do, and I wish that I understood video production code and things that are needed to make this happen, because I'll tell you, I would definitely donate some of my code time to assist in making the editor better.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it here first. Vincent's going to be making the next piece of open source video software.
Yeah, that's not the case. I know. I don't have the coding skills in video production to do it. Maybe one of these days, I'm in a little bit of a tight spot right now. I'd like to eventually be able to donate a little bit to the Olive developers and say, hey, here's $100 or whatever that I can donate, and say, I'd like to see this editor, happen. I don't have the ability to help you code wise. Maybe I can write documentation for you. I can I can write documentation for you, and I can possibly donate some funding, when I have it available. So hopefully maybe we can get that editor there. But, that being said, I am not a purist when it comes to open source either. I like open source software, and I am one of these people that if there's, two pieces of software that can do something and there's an open source version and a proprietary version, I'm going to use the tool that does the job best. But if those tools are purely equal, meaning they, work for me, either one, like just fine, which one am I going to use? I'm going to go for the open source one if that they're purely equal. But in the real world, that doesn't exist, does it? There's always going to be differences. So
Right.
If you're going to move to Linux today, what editor do you think you would use? Open source and proprietary. You can pick one from each category.
Probably I'd be tied between Olive. Again, I don't really know about the stability, but going off of what you said, if it was a little more stable, and Lightworks, because they both sound like pretty good alternatives to Premiere. That being said, I like Premiere, but I think that if someone was going to say, okay, you cannot use Premiere anymore, you can't use anything on Windows or Mac, I think both of those have good options, and both of those are good pieces of software.
Yeah. And the other thing too about Olive and Kaline Live, by the way, is they do have Mac and Windows versions. Kaline Live on Windows, or on Mac, you have to manually compile it, I think. But on Olive, I don't remember if they have a binary for Mac. I mean, I know you can compile it for it if you don't, but I don't know. I like Olive, and to me, maybe we should do a video where I show you Olive, because that editor, I tell you, it looks a lot like Premiere Pro. Honestly, I've said this before. It's one of the big reasons I like it. It reminds me a lot of Premiere Pro. Maybe too much. In fact, maybe Adobe might sue them, because it's very similar design-wise. I mean, it's not an identical copy, but they're very similar, right? They have a lot of similarities, particularly the preview program monitor design. That's one thing. Their timeline blocks kind of look like older Premiere Pro, like clip blocks and stuff. I mean, so it's got different similarities, but at the same time, it isn't an identical copy, but they're similar. But I'm with you. To me, it's Lightworks for the proprietary right now, and Olive for the open source. That to me, that's like the two best picks, at least for me. And so that's the way I would go, is one of those two, which I actually, last month, I thought about actually licensing the pro version of Lightworks and try it out for a month. I didn't do it, but I thought about it. And so who knows, maybe I'll end up doing that at some point, because, the Lightworks people, their older design, I'll be honest, it was crap. I really did not like it, but the new version, I like it.
It's getting them onto it, folks.
Yep. Have you actually edited any videos in Lightworks before? Because I know you said you had installed.
I've messed around with it. I don't think I've ever edited a full real video in Lightworks. That's what I need to do. Sit down and edit a video in Lightworks, get used to the controls. I'm just too used to Adobe Premiere. I need to spread my wings, if you will, fly.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, regardless of what editor you use, as one of the filmmaker channels that I watched said a while back, editing is basically the same in every editor. It's the workflow that changes, but the actual techniques, your J cuts, your L cuts, the way you lay out shots and everything, and the way you do your timeline. At the end of the day, it's the same kind of thing, right? You're still telling a story. You're still making a TV show. You're still making a movie. You're still making a YouTube video, right? So at the end of the day, I feel like that a good editor, this is my personal opinion, can move between different software. And I don't want to say I'm a good editor, but I have moved between Openshot, Kaline Live, Olive. I've used Premiere Elements before. I briefly, used Premiere Pro. I like the way Premiere Pro does things, but I haven't really used it a lot. But I've actually thought about licensing it before because it's a nice editor. It really is. And the other thing that's really, that's a big deal when it comes to editing too is collaboration, right? If you're on a team, and your team is using Lightworks, right? You can't really edit that in Premiere Pro because you can't send that project file over. There's, you're going to have to be in the same ecosystem. So that's part of the problem with video editing in general is the ecosystem, right? Like YouTube, it seems to be Final Cut Pro X and Premiere Pro. Like that's the two main editors from what I can tell in that market. So if I was going to do a collaboration video with another YouTuber, the likelihood is that we would be using Premiere Pro to do that, because even if I just had to get the trial for it or license it for a month and then use like a Windows machine, because I'm going to bet that there's a good chance that they're going to be using Premiere Pro. I mean, again, the Linux world, I don't know about that now, but I don't know if there still is, but there used to be some Linux YouTubers that actually said they edited like in Windows or Mac, and then they would record in Linux. I don't know if anyone still does that, but that used to be a thing people did. Honestly, I don't think I would do that now, but I'm not going to say I definitely wouldn't, because to me, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a content creator, and I love Linux, but at the end of the day, I just like to use the tool that's best for the job and within reason. And to me, that's why I'm looking at Lightworks so much, because I would like to stay on Linux to edit. But at the same time, I want an editor that's stable and that can do multi-camera clips and things like that. So, any particular features that you would like to see in an editor? Like if you were going to get an editor, right? If you were going to build your editor or go get somebody's editor and make changes to it, what are the features that you would put in an editor to make it bare minimal for a pro and for yourself?
I'd say really, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask, not because I haven't done video editing, but just because it's not really something I sit around. I just want something that's robust, gets the job done, something also that really you can just throw things at it. Like in Premiere, one thing I like about it, you can import almost any format without a hitch. It doesn't complain. It doesn't have any issues like one format or another. Like, of course, you may have issues with the actual speed it's previewing at or things like that, but pretty much it's all seamless. It does all the work in the background, and I think that's what most editors aim to do, obviously, but just something where it's really seamless, where you don't really think about it much, and where you can just get work done. Like, you just go into it, you're not really worrying about it, you're just getting work done, right?
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that the general gist of it would be the same for me, but one thing I will say is, as far as the codec support is, on Linux, the codec support's actually pretty good, despite what some YouTubers that have trouble editing stuff in Linux would say. If you are using the right editor and you know how to get everything configured, it can actually be a pretty good experience. Like, for example, you can use ProRes on Linux, pretty good. Almost all the Linux video editors these days support ProRes. So if you've got a camera that shoots ProRes, you can move to the Linux world if you want. You can edit that in Kaline Live natively. You can edit that in Olive natively. You can edit that in Lightworks natively. Really, to me, the big problem with formats in Linux for video right now is RAW, because if you exclude the Lightworks editor and you exclude DaVinci Resolve, I don't believe there's any RAW support at all for any RAW format in Linux at all. So if you're shooting RAW, that's a problem, right?
True. I would say that's true.
But I mean, that being said, I don't think that, from what I can tell these days, it depends on the production. Some productions are shooting RAW and some aren't, right? to be fair, I'm looking out from afar. I'm not part of any major television production or film production, but from what I can tell, it seems like when the red cameras are used, they almost always shoot red code, which is their version of RAW. But it seems like with like Arri Alexis, they almost always shoot ProRes. And with a lot of other cameras, it's a lot of time ProRes. So from what I can tell these days, I think that if your editor can support ProRes, it seems like that in a lot of cases, you'll be fine. And then the consumer formats like H.264, which a lot of cameras record in, right? I mean, the DSLR I got from Canon, which I shoot all my videos on, that doesn't even do ProRes. The highest bit rate it can do, I think, is like 100 megabits per second, H.264. So, and honestly, that's fine. I edit it. It looks all right. It works. So I don't think that it's really that bad. That being said, I just want to say one other thing about the Kaline Live thing here, because we were talking about that a while ago and the issues I have with it. So Kaline Live, supposedly, and I haven't actually tested this, according to the guy from Nerd on the Street, it seems like that with that footage being converted into ProRes for Kaline Live, which it does support, it will work way better with that timeline playback. And I don't know if that's actually true, but he actually, when he edits videos, he will convert them to ProRes. So I do wonder, I've heard that in a lot of editors, ProRes definitely will work better. And so I'm thinking maybe I need to go ahead and start I don't have anything that can record natively in ProRes right now. At some point I may change that, but for right now I would have to convert. But there, FFmpeg can convert, and you could build like a little script that could do it. So it could be something I could work with, but we'll have to see. I think that if ProRes worked good in Kaline Live, I might end up using it again. I don't know. It's not a bad editor. Again, so I'm just saying for those that like Kaline Live out there, I'm not trying to dog Kaline Live. It's just that for my workflow and for what I want out of an editor, it's not quite there. But it's not bad. Like I said, edited on it for a long time. So we're getting close to the end of the show, Carmen. Any other video-related or Linux-related topics you wanted to bring up here while we're talking about this in the episode?
Not today.
Not today.
I appreciate your opportunity to give me the floor there, but not today.
All right. Well, in that case, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up here. So, folks, like I said, there'll be links in the show notes to the different things we talked about today. I'll put a link to the Lightworks website. So if you want to try out Lightworks, there is a free version. But do note the free version, you are limited to exporting 720p video, I think at 60 frames a second. So if you want to do anything higher than that, you will have to get a license. But again, that is something that you can do. It does work on Linux. And it will work on Ubuntu-based distributions as well as on Fedora/Red Hat-based distributions. So if you want to run this on CentOS and have really good stability, you can do that. Or if you want to run it on your Ubuntu laptop or whatever, or your Linux machine or whatever, you can do that. So they offer builds for both. They also offer Mac and Windows builds as well if you aren't in the Linux world yet and you want to try it out. In addition to that, we'll put a link to Kaline Live and the Olive video website as well. So if you want to check out those editors, which are completely free and open source, if you want to try out those, you can do that as well. So with that little information out of the way, Carmen, where can they find you throughout the week online or in the real world?
CarmenShields.com and YouTube.com/TheCoolCarmen. I just put out a new video talking about the former Kmart Newport News. They did a really interesting art project, basically letting people tag the building, add their own little mark. The building's supposed to be coming down to make way either for some sort of new city center, something to help revitalize. Well, not revitalize, but transform the area, add new police, fire station, or they're not. That's one of the proposed uses. They're still figuring it out, but yeah, pretty much it.
All right. Well, sounds good. You can find me at vincentmaggard.com. You can find me on YouTube at Vincent Maggard. And of course, I am a co-founder, as is Carmen, of Open Source Tonight. So of course, you can find me here every week on Open Source Tonight. And until next week, you've been listening to Open Source Tonight, everybody. This is Vincent and Carmen saying thanks for listening. See you all next week. Goodbye, everybody.